Bonjour tout le monde.
Good afternoon, everyone. I call this meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 36 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Public Accounts.
Standing orders. Members are attending in person in the room and remotely using the Zoom application. Conformément à l'article 108.3G du règlement, le comité...
Pursuant to Standing Order 103G, the committee is resuming our study of the Public Accounts of Canada 2024 and 2025, which were referred to the committee on Tuesday, December 17, 2024, and Friday, November 7, 2025, respectively. Mr. Speaker, or Mr. Chair, rather, a clarification. Have you heard anything from the Revenue Minister after we sent an invitation a few weeks ago? No, not yet. Like you, I hope that what with yesterday concluding the budget cycle and lessening the load of the Revenue Minister, hopefully they will start returning our calls and emails. But for now, the answer is no. We will continue sending out invitations. Thank you.
I want to welcome our new member, MP Ma. Nice to have you joining us here. And we have a guest today, Mr. Rana. Nice to have you here as well. There's no other changes on the committee. So I'll turn to our witnesses from the Canada Infrastructure Bank. Frédéric Duguay, Executive Vice President and Chief Legal and Information Officer. Thank you very much for joining us today. I believe you're dialing in from Toronto. And Stephen Robbins, Executive Vice President, Portfolio and Strategic Projects, also by video conference. And I believe there's an opening statement from Mr. Duguay. You have about 5 minutes, please, for that, and then we'll turn to questions. And we will endeavor to keep you here just for an hour. And thank you for your patience as we were voting today on the economic update.
Chair?
Oh, just one second.
We don't
please.
see the guests on the screen, so.
We will work on that in the meantime, but is it okay if I begin, Mr. McKinnon? Absolutely. All right. Mr. Duguay, you have the floor, please, about 5 minutes.
Good afternoon, Chair and honourable members. Merci de nous avoir invités.
Thank you for the invitation to address the committee in relation to its consideration of the Public Accounts of Canada 2024 and 2025. My name is Frédéric Duguay, and I am Executive Vice President and Chief Legal and Information Officer at the Canada Infrastructure Bank. And I am joined by my colleague Steve Robbins, Executive Vice President, Portfolio and Strategic Projects. The CIB was created to help get infrastructure projects unstuck and build more faster. Through our flexible financing, we can address market and affordability gaps that get in the way of important projects moving forward.
Like a granting program, the CIB is a repayable investment tool. We make disciplined commercial investments designed to crowd in private and institutional capital, lower the overall cost of infrastructure, and get paid back so that funds can be reinvested into new projects. The CIB operates under an independent board of directors with accountability to Parliament exercised through the minister, including through the corporate planning process. Since 2020, the CIB has consistently invested $3 to $4 billion annually, and we expect this pace to continue given the critical importance of infrastructure to Canada's economic future. This pace of investments was confirmed by the PBO in a 2025 report, which concluded that the CIB is on track to reach $37 billion in financial closes by the end of fiscal 29-30. Today, we've made loans to 108 projects that have a total project value of $55 billion. We have projects in every province and territory, and our pipeline is healthy. These projects support more than 315,000 Canadian jobs and other downstream domestic benefits for Canadian companies, workers, and supply chains. 11 projects are completed, and this number is growing every quarter.
For every project we finance, we look at the public benefits that the new infrastructure delivers to Canadians, such as growing the economy, closing the Indigenous infrastructure gap, and diversifying trade corridors. Our projects range from a rail terminal in Alberta's industrial heartland to help move goods to Canada's west coast and onward to international markets, to a wind turbine and energy storage system in Nunavut to get an island community off diesel, to a biomass plant in a remote First Nation community in northern Quebec to ensure long-term energy security and economic development. Budget 2025 increased the CIB's allocation to $45 billion. This additional allocation will allow us to continue on our ambitious program of investments in projects that deliver real benefits to Canadians. It also increased the CIB's Indigenous investment target to $3 billion, as we have surpassed the original $1 billion target.
The public accounts. As detailed in the 2025 public accounts, government appropriations to the CIB have nearly doubled since 2024. This reflects the fact that 80% of CIB finance projects are currently in construction and require capital.
We expect this trend to continue as more projects ramp up construction activities. Additionally, the expansion in our mandate means that we have more opportunities to unlock further investments across the country in a broader number of sectors. Infrastructure finance is not based on spending within a single year. Rather, investments are committed and financial agreements are finalized first, with money released over several years as construction progresses.
In 2024, the CIB has not required government appropriations to cover its operating costs. As repayments of our loans are received, including initial principal repayments now underway, those funds are recycled into new investments. This reinforces the CIB's financial self-sustainability and extends the investing capacity of Parliament's authorized capital over time, while minimizing the burden on taxpayers. On an annual basis, the CIB works with our portfolio department, Housing, Infrastructure and Communities Canada, to develop a corporate plan and budget. In 2025, this process was interrupted by the prorogation of Parliament in January and the subsequent election. Once the election was completed and a new minister was in place, the CIB and HICC worked closely to finalize the 25-26 corporate plan, which was approved in December 2025 and tabled in Parliament in accordance with the legislative requirements of the Financial Administration Act. Je suis également heureux d'annoncer.
I am also pleased to report that we have completed our 2026-2027 corporate plan, which was submitted to government for approval last week. This plan reflects our current mandate and aligns with the priorities of the government to leverage tools like the CIB to crowd in private capital and get more infrastructure built faster.
Both Mr. Robbins and I welcome your questions.
Thank you very, very much. We'll now begin with our first round, which will consist of 3 members, 6 minutes each. Ms. Kusi, I believe you're kicking things off for us.
Thank you, Chair. Monsieur Duguay.
Mr. Duguay.
25 Parliamentary Budget Office report on the Canada Infrastructure Bank states that the CIB is not expected to reach its disbursement goals in any sector by 2027-2028. Is that acceptable to you?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. What I will say is we accept the findings from the PBO's reports. As I said in my opening remarks, we have over $18 billion to date of investment commitments, and the PBO in the report also acknowledged the fact that we would reach $37 billion in financial closes by 29-30. So that's above the $35 billion appropriation that was initially approved in 2017. And you have to recognize, as we deploy capital, we provide capital to projects over generally a time period, an availability period that will, on average, be around 5 years. So as projects get built, our capital gets deployed over that time period. And essentially, that's where the PBO report, in identifying essentially that gap, doesn't necessarily recognize the difference between when capital is committed at a time that we reach financial close, and when capital is deployed over the life cycle of a project, which generally, as I said, takes a period of over five or 6 years in terms of project construction.
The report also shows that since the bank was established, 2/3 of partner funding has come from public sector partners, meaning 2 of every 3 project dollars has come from one form of government or another. The former chair of the Canadian Infrastructure Bank, now the clerk of the Privy Council, Michael Sabia, claimed that for every dollar of federal commitment, there is $4 or $5 waiting to come from the private sector. And we know from the PBO that this hasn't been the case. Why has this private investment not come as of yet?
We have in our annual report, and I can also let Mr. Robbins speak to that. We essentially measure capital deployment and attraction of private sector capital through 2 horizons. So at the time where we reach financial close, and as the PBO notes, the CIB's capital is one source of capital, generally as part of the capital stack of a project that may also include government grants, but also funding from the private sector. And on that metric, we're actually over a 1 ratio, a 1-to-1 ratio. And we also measure the long-term enabled capital with respect to a particular project. And this might be the right segue to turn over to Mr. Robbins, who can provide details in terms of throughout the life cycle of an investment, how we measure the capital that's enabled in a project.
Just to expand on what my colleague, Mr. Duguay, said, on every single project, we start by measuring the CIB's investment and the private sector investment into that project. However, over time, the private sector pays us back. And so there's an evolution in how much private capital is in the project from when we first start construction through the life of that project. And as my colleague said, as of right now, there's more than $1 of every private sector money in every project that the CIB has invested. Further, we commissioned an independent study to look at the enabled private capital. So my colleague talked about the example of the short-line rail terminal in the Alberta Industrial Heartland. There, explicitly, the goal of that project is to facilitate new investment in industrial activity around the Alberta Industrial Heartland that would not be able to access global markets absent improved rail connections. When you look at not just the capital that is going into the infrastructure project, but the private sector investment that's enabled by those investments, that study found there was more than $4 of that enabled investment that was coming from every single CIB investment.
We're currently studying the 2024 and 2025 public accounts, which show that the Canada Infrastructure Bank has received billions of dollars from the federal government and continues to yearly. However, your most recent quarterly financial report shows that despite billions in public money being spent, the bank has completed just 11 total projects, and this June will mark 9 years since the bank was founded by this Liberal government. Do you believe completing just 11 projects in 9 years shows value for money for Canadians?
As I mentioned earlier, we have over 108 projects in which we've reached financial close, and over 80 of those 108 projects are currently in active construction. And as the member points out, 11 have reached a completed milestone and are in active operation. And the life cycle of an infrastructure project and the constructions essentially takes multiple years. As I said earlier, on average, a general availability period for the construction of a project will be 5 or 6 years. So we are seeing these numbers trend upwards every quarter. And it's currently 11, and it will continue to grow quarter by quarter as those 108 projects in which we've reached financial close reach a fully completed construction milestone.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Kuzi. Up next, I believe, is Mr. Osborne. Yes, you have 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can you tell us the interlink between the Canadian Infrastructure Bank and the Major Projects Office and how they work together?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll let Mr. Robbins take this question as he's more involved in these discussions than I am.
Thank you for the question. We work very closely with the Major Projects Office as identified in the Statement of Priorities and Accountabilities that was issued to the CIB earlier this year. We prioritize investments in projects that have been referred to the Major Projects Office. What that looks like on a day-to-day basis is the Major Projects Office is working to ensure a coordinated federal presence on those projects, looking to ensure that they have a clear path to securing regulatory approvals and defining the project. The CIB works closely as a source of financial expertise with the Major Projects Office to assess the overall economics of the project and think about how our tools can support getting that project into construction, becoming part of the 89 projects that we have across the country under construction. We're seeing results from that so far. As you may have seen, we announced an investment in the Port of Montreal's Contrecoeur expansion terminal, a loan from the CIB to support expansion of container shipping on the East Coast so that businesses have reliable access to global markets and aren't reliant on shipping through U.S. ports. We announced a loan to Nouveau Monde Graphite, another project that's been referred to the Major Projects Office, to enable them to proceed construction on a critical minerals project outside of Montreal. And we're working very closely on a number of projects across the Arctic, whether that's the Grays Bay Port and Road, which we're supporting with our Project Acceleration Initiative, which provides early stage capital to these projects to help get them to become shovel ready.
Thank you. In terms of the Port of Montreal, can you expand on the economic benefit, the number of jobs that will be created, the investment in the project, what it means in terms of fiscal advantage, in terms of international trade? What will this expansion do, not only for the economy of Montreal, but the eastern region, I guess, and Canada as a whole?
I'll just take your question in three parts. The first benefit that is coming from this project is the construction. And I don't have the number of jobs that we estimate that construction will support in front of me, but $2 billion plus of construction will create significant employment for construction trades workers and significant demand for trades workers in the Greater Montreal area. The second benefit is around the fiscal benefit that you speak to. The CIB has made a loan that is repayable and charges interest in that project. What that means is that over time, users of that port terminal who pay charges to get their containers lifted off the ship or to use the port will generate revenue that is used to repay the CIB's loan. Now, the private sector won't provide a loan like that because the timing of when those ships arrive and how quickly demand ramps up is uncertain. What the CIB's financing is willing to do is be patient in terms of the timing of when that demand growth happens and be repaid as it materializes. That's what's enabling the project to proceed. Finally, I want to speak to the broader economic benefits that that project provides. If you think about the value of improved container terminals for both Canadians from an affordability perspective, as they think about the ability to access goods and services from global markets, but also for local firms that are thinking about serving the world and diversifying to new markets. They need reliable access to trade. They need reliable access to container ports that have deliverable, clear delivery timelines, speedy flows, are cost-effective and efficient. And that's part of what Contrecoeur is enabling. So it allows the Greater Montreal area and Eastern Canada to attract new businesses, to trade with the world, and to not rely on using U.S. seaports.
Thank you. What does the risk assessment look like in terms of the Port of Montreal expansion?
It's a significant project. As we think about the risk that the CIB is taking, it's all around the timing of our repayment. And what that looks like is, there's going to be a period of time, as my colleague has mentioned, where this container terminal is under construction. It's not earning revenues while the terminal is under construction. There's no users yet. We're willing, unlike other investors, to wait. Then there's going to be a period while that container terminal ramps up, while shipping lines decide, should I serve Montreal? Should I serve Halifax? Should I serve U.S. seaports? As that demand ramps up, that's when our repayment kicks in. And so as the container terminal fills up, we'll get paid back faster and faster. And as that money comes back, we'll recycle it into other projects that support Canadian economic growth.
You've committed $18 billion to projects across the country, but a much smaller amount of those funds has been drawn by project proponents. Can you talk about why it takes so long to deploy this capital?
Absolutely. We've committed, as you said, $18 billion, and we've now drawn just over $7 to fund the projects. We do that because on every credit agreement, we are very disciplined to ensure that we protect the taxpayer's investment, and we only flow funds as construction occurs to those projects. Now, construction of these projects are complicated. They require sequencing of multiple activities over a period of multiple years. They need to be matched to construction seasons. As my colleague talked about, the wind farm that we financed in Nunavut on an island in Hudson Bay is an example of a project where being able to catch the spring sea lift for essential parts is a critical part of delivering that project to a schedule. When you think about the projects at the scale we're financing, they typically take about 4 to 5 years to deliver. And so what you're seeing today in the public accounts is a catch-up of the rate at which we are drawing funds from the appropriation, nearing $3 billion, to the rate that we've been reaching financial close since 2020. And that's just reflecting that if you start closing $3 billion a year in 2020, it takes about 4 or 5 years to fully ramp up the disbursements to that same rate.
Thank you. That is your time, Mr. Osborne. Suivant, c'est Monsieur Lemire, s'il vous plaît.
Now we have Mr. Lemire, 6 minutes, please. Thank you, Chair. And I would like to thank our witnesses for being with us today. In your written response to a question I asked in this committee earlier, your representatives noted that CIB gives repayable loans with interest, and then over different quarters, you manage to fund your own activities. However, when you look at page 156 and 157, you have $131 million, and the federal government has given a check worth $2.9 billion. Despite this, you've spent $15 billion. There's a significant deficit representing about $150 million between your expenditures and revenues. I don't necessarily have the numbers in front of me. As Mr. Robbins noted, in the answer to the committee from July 2024 to the present, we have achieved revenues through income on our loans. We are and payments on the principal. We have taken in enough money to manage our operational spending. Regarding expenditures and liabilities, I don't have all the details. We do still have appropriations, like Mr. Robbins was explaining, that will be sufficient to invest, pay out the funds to the projects we have invested in. Those amounts are growing quarter over quarter as our projects advance. An increasing number of projects have reached the construction phase, and this accounts for the increased appropriations granted to the CIB. You mentioned that there are 13 projects in Quebec out of a total of 108 projects. This is disproportionately few projects for Quebec. Is Quebec getting its fair share? Mr. Chair, just to confirm, my understanding is that the member is looking for a written response. That would compare funding given to the different provinces. At the end of Q3, we did have 13 projects underway in Quebec. Among them, the Port of Contrecoeur that my colleague was just talking about. Is my colleague asking for a written answer? Yes, I am. I'm not trying to trap you here. I'm just trying to get answers. I understand that Quebec is being underinvested in. Honourable Chair, we will be providing that information. Thank you very much. You still have 2.5 minutes, Mr. Lemire. Thank you, Chair. I would also like another explanation. The Canada Infrastructure Bank is planning to invest in Build Canada Homes, to build housing. And there's this massive boondoggle now, the Canada Wealth Fund, and it will also be investing in various infrastructure and housing projects. So a lot of people are being paid to invest in projects planned by the Government of Canada. So here's my question. Will the creation of the Sovereign Wealth Fund for major projects, does this represent the fact that the government lacks confidence in the Canada Infrastructure Bank? I don't want to speak to the Canada Sovereign Wealth Fund. I can be very clear about our investment priorities here at the CIB. One of our priorities is to build infrastructure that will enable more housing to be built in turn. The CIB is investing in a number of such projects. For example, public transit, enabling infrastructure, water processing, water treatment. The CIB is there to work with municipalities and developers to get investments done in enabling infrastructure in such a way that would allow other government agencies like Build Canada Homes to build more housing. So we are present in the housing sector because we invest in enabling infrastructure. And in doing so, we hope to create favorable conditions for the construction of more housing. In Abitibi-Témiscamingue, roughly 2% of the Canadian economy comes from my region. So I would ask the CIB to invest more in my region. You've invested $18.1 billion in total. How much have you invested in my region? I'm not even asking for a written answer there because I know the answer is $0. You've invested nothing in Abitibi-Témiscamingue, despite the fact that our region is brimming over in critical minerals, valuable critical minerals. Given all of this, how come you're totally absent from my region? Mr. Robbins took a question earlier about the work we are doing with the Major Projects Office to move forward various critical minerals projects. To clarify, we are investing in the Quebec Federation of School Transporters. We are investing to help these transporters obtain loans to purchase zero-emissions buses. And that investment is accessible to school transit agencies all throughout Quebec, including those in Abitibi-Témiscamingue. And in fact, we are aware that one agency in Abitibi-Témiscamingue did draw on these resources. So money is moving into Abitibi-Témiscamingue. We're talking money that goes to small businesses trying to replace diesel buses with zero-emission vehicles. They are receiving funding. They are receiving investment. It's a way that helps them manage the costs of this transition. So just to clarify, yes, regional investments are important, but we also have Quebec-wide investments that various regions can draw upon. Thank you very much. We will begin our second turn now. 5 MPs with various speaking times will take the floor. We'll now give the floor to Mr. Deltel. Thank you, Chair. And welcome to the new colleagues here with us today. Welcome to you, Mr. Duguay and Mr. Robbins. Thank you for taking part in this discussion. I would like to circle back to what my Bloc Québécois colleague was saying. I was a little bit upset because he kind of stole my topic from me. And when I say I was a bit mad at this in a tongue-in-cheek sort of way, the Liberals created the Canada Infrastructure Bank about 10 years ago. Now they've created another investment vehicle, the Sovereign Wealth Fund, which has been described as a boondoggle. I look forward to seeing how interpreters will render this Quebec expression, because it actually came up in the remarks of my leader yesterday. And Could you tell us exactly what the difference is between you guys and that big boondoggle, the Sovereign Wealth Fund?
Oui, Monsieur le Président. Donc,
I can, Mr. Chair. At the CIB, our mandate is to invest in infrastructure projects that are being held up for some reason. Sometimes because the private sector is not ready to assume the necessary risk. Sometimes there's a lack of funding available. Our mandate compels us to step in when we identify these sorts of projects. And Mr. Robbins was very clear when he talked about how we're investing in the Contrecoeur port. We are able to look at a project over the long term, and we are able to show significant patience as we wait for the return on investment if the project is in the national interest. As for the Sovereign Wealth Fund, which the government just announced this week, I can only talk about what was announced in yesterday's statement. I agree with what you're saying, but allow me to move on to another question. You were founded in 2017. Between 2017 and now, COVID impacted the economy, reducing the need for physical office space in the Government of Canada and popularizing telework. The member for Markham Unionville said that on June 10th, he said, I would like to highlight the scathing report by the Auditor General on the use of government office space. The report notes that the Liberals promised to reduce office space by 50% for $1.1 billion over 10 years. But the Auditor General realized that only 33% reductions were expected. It's not me saying this. It was the member from Markham Unionville who said that, who is now a Liberal. He noted that there had been a series of broken promises. It takes 6 to 8 years to transition a building. This is unacceptable. And I highlight again that this came from the member from Markham Unionville just over a year ago. He noted that millions of Canadians are desperately searching for affordable housing. And now we have a report highlighting that this is the same old Liberal government, which is still disconnected from Canadians' reality. Again, this does not come from me. This comes from the current member for Markham Unionville. Mr. Duguay, here's my question. Have you experienced the same difficulties that the Auditor General has? To take that question, over the last 5 or 6 years, as I noted in my opening remarks, the CIB is an independent Crown corporation managed by an independent board. We submit corporate plans to the department on a yearly basis. We also set out an operating budget showing our growth and expenses over a 5-year period. The CIB has been growing over the last 5 or 6 years, as I noted, because currently we have $18 billion invested in 108 projects. A number of these projects are moving to the construction phase and will require more capital, and it seems you've been a lot more effective than the Liberal government, at least if we are to go by the member for Markham Unionville, because he talked about how millions of Canadians are desperately searching for affordable housing. And a report has just confirmed that this is the same old Liberal government, which is still disconnected from reality. And again, this comes from the member for Markham Unionville. Thank you, Mr. Deltel. We will now move over to Ms. Yip.
Thank you, and thank you to the witnesses for coming on virtually. And I'd like to return to the work at hand, which is asking questions to the Canada Infrastructure Bank, and specifically to the bank, and not making any other comments about fellow committee members. Okay, since the CIB is not a granting program, but rather a lending program. Can you explain how the investment structure works and how that is an efficient way to use taxpayers' money and get more infrastructure built?
I'm happy to start on that question, and then Mr. Duguay, if there's anything you'd like to add. As you say, the CIB makes investments in projects. What that means is that when we make a loan to a project, it is not an expense of the government of Canada. It does not show up, as you see in the public accounts, as that's the amount that's showing there. And there was a colleague from, one of your colleagues asked the question about the revenue, the 2.8 billion in revenues that we were showing from government appropriations. That reflects the flow of funds from the government of Canada to the CIB to fund those loans that are, then lent out with interest to various projects across the country. As those projects proceed through construction, they start generating revenues and operations, whether that is the cost that a wind turbine charges to the grid, the fees that users of a port pay, or the fare that someone pays when they tap onto a transit system. We then use those revenues to repay our loan over time. And so over the life cycle of the portfolio, we anticipate getting more money back from those investments than we put out in the first place. What that allows us to do is cover our operating costs and create a flywheel of investment that comes from reinvesting those proceeds over time. To date, we've now seen over $600 million flow back from our initial wave of investments back to the CIB that we've been using to offset the requirements for incremental capital from the shareholder. That's what allows us to be a self-sustaining institution that funds, $3 to $4 billion a year in new infrastructure across the country.
And how do your projects help with affordability and more vulnerable Canadians?
Absolutely. There are a few places where I would point to how our projects help support affordability. One of our biggest sectors of activity is in the clean power sector, where we're financing renewable projects across the country in partnership with provincial utilities. So we partner with a provincial utility to provide a stapled financing offer that is more cost effective for wind turbine operators to build wind and solar facilities across the country that they then sell into grids. That shows up directly in the electricity bills that customers pay because the cost of the wind being supplied by these facilities is cheaper than it would otherwise be without the CIB's financing. Another example of how we support affordability is around how we finance the expansion of rural broadband across the country. And so if you think about the decisions that large ISP makes, they're more than happy to run fiber in dense urban areas. But as you get further and further into rural Canada, it becomes more difficult to earn a return. And so low-cost financing from the CIB helps extend broadband into more remote regions of the country. And finally, we think about how do we bring clean, affordable energy to northern communities. One investment I'm proud of is our investment in the Nunavut Energy Security Project, which was about creating local source fuel in Nunavut on the Arctic Ocean in the very northern part of Northwest Territories. What that allows is you to save on trucking fuel from Edmonton, 3,000 kilometers north, and results in lower fuel costs for the local community.
Will any of these projects and perhaps some of your more green type projects, will they overlap with some of the major projects?
Absolutely. One example of the more green projects that overlaps with the major projects office would be the early works investment we've made in the BC North Coast transmission line. That's an example of a project where this is about ensuring the expansion of BC's clean electricity grid into northwestern BC, and is a project that the major projects office has been working closely with us on.
What are the key differences between your 2024-25 corporate plan and the current 2026-27 corporate plan?
The corporate plan is a critical tool for aligning the investment activities of the CIB with the priorities of the Government of Canada. And so in January, we received a new statement of priorities and accountabilities that set new long-term sector targets for the CIB and aligned our our sectors with the priorities of the Government of Canada. So it established a $15 billion target for investments in the trade and transportation sector about expanding and diversifying our trade and ensuring that Canada Canada and Canadian firms have access to global markets. It's at a $20 billion target for clean energy investments, things like the power projects I've talked about, but also investments in hydrogen, clean fuels, the expansion of electric vehicle charging across the country. It's at a $5 billion target for investments in AI and digital infrastructure, and a $10 billion investment target for investments that support new housing development. Think about things like installing the water pipes at major development sites to make sure that municipal infrastructure can be built ahead of housing development, or things like our investment in the REM project in Montreal, which helped connect downtown Montreal to neighborhoods across the greater Montreal area. And you're really seeing that expansion of new housing along the line. It also encouraged us to look at investments in the Arctic, as we've mentioned several of those today, and increased our Indigenous target, as my colleague Mr. Duguay mentioned, to $3 billion. So that corporate plan, the corporate plan 25-26 that was tabled in Parliament earlier this month, and our 26-27 corporate plan that was approved just last week, reflect that shift in the CIB's investment priorities towards the priorities of the Government of Canada.
Voilà, merci beaucoup. Thank you, Ms. Ip. Suivant, c'est Michel Lemire.
Thank you very much. I'll add a bit of time to the clock. Mr. Lemire, you will have 4 minutes.
The official opposition will have 7 minutes, and then the government members 7 minutes. So you're welcome to split that amongst yourselves, and then we're going to end this first hour. Mr. Lemire, 4 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
You have 4 minutes, Mr. Lemire. Thank you, Chair. Mr. Robbins, you mentioned that you are investing in internet connection. Over the last 5 years, have you invested in internet in Quebec? Because the Quebec government has a project to finance rural broadband. The federal government has transferred about $7 billion to this project, and that is an area where the federal government just handed over money without strings attached. And what do you know? It was an incredible success in securing greater internet connection in rural areas. I was elected in 2019. It was part of my campaign promises, and we managed to get this done because the federal government just handed money right over to Quebec with no conditions. Now the infrastructure bank is being funded to increase rural broadband. Is it working in Quebec at all on this?
Thank you for the question. As you point to, the government of Quebec moved incredibly quickly on the expansion of rural broadband and is in many ways a leader in the expansion of rural broadband. And what that meant was by the time that the CIB's mandate was evolved to include rural broadband, those proposals were already well advanced. And so there wasn't a need for additional financing from the CIB in that case. And we've been prioritizing other investments in Quebec. As you mentioned in your exchange with my colleague, there's 13 projects, but just a rough count, I'm sure we're well over $2 and maybe even $3 billion of investment in Quebec. So it's a much larger share, as many of our investments are large in Quebec, whether you think about the REM, the Port of Contrecoeur, some significant wind projects, that sort of thing.
I have an important question, especially given what the Auditor General said in her testimony last week. You are a Crown Corporation, and as a Crown Corporation, you are exempt from various information sharing and transparency requirements. Are Crown Corporations a new way for the federal government to wash its hands of an issue because you have different accountability criteria? For example, you, like EDC, are exempt from the having an emergency fund in reserve. When it comes to transparency, are you willing to open your doors to the Auditor General so that she can inspect your books, especially given that you mostly are funded by public money? I think you ought to show transparency. The Auditor General currently cannot audit you as though you were a normal department or a normal government program. And the Auditor General has requested greater access because, as it stands now, a number of Crown corporations have been exempted from audits by the Auditor General. You receive public funds, and I think because of that, the Auditor General ought to have access to your books. Would you agree?
Please, that.
Mr. Chair, just to start off, as a Crown Corporation, we are subject to very clear accountability mechanisms. As Mr. Robbins explained, we have a corporate plan which sets out our operating budget, and that budget must be approved by the Treasury Board. All Crown corporations are audited on an annual basis. There are special reviews at least once every 10 years. And so we do have accountability mechanisms. We are accountable to Parliament through the Minister. We appear at parliamentary committees like this one. So I get the sense that you're answering no. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Lemire.
Mr. Stevenson, for 7 minutes. I understand you want to split the time with your colleague, Mr. Couric. I will endeavor to do that, but the weight is on your shoulders. If you're running on, I'm not going to interrupt you. So, but 3.5 minutes for you.
Thank you, Chair. If I can, what I read and then what you've said is, I'm not exactly sure. I've mixed some of the numbers up here, but can you confirm that you said you had 54 billion or 54.6 billion in costs, 18 billion is committed. Now, is that 18 billion in the 89 that's left over? That's not in what was completed in the 11 projects?
I'm happy to start on that question. So the total capital cost of the projects that the CIB financed is $54.6 billion.
That's for that's for 108 projects?
That is for 108 projects.
Okay.
That is financed by.
And the 18 is what you have already put out.
The 18 billion is the CIB's share of the 54.6 billion. So also in that 54.6 billion is more than $18 billion from private sector investors. And then there is also funds from other levels of government that flow into these projects. As an example, we made a loan to irrigation districts in Alberta, where we provided a loan and the government of Alberta provided a grant into that project. Of the 18 billion, sorry, please go ahead.
No, I was just going to go on with that because in the past, it looks like the model was supposed to be that the CIB's funds were to be leveraging private sector funds, but it sounded like, as my colleague had mentioned earlier, that most of the leveraging has been other public sector funds, other governments that are putting in that. Can you clarify how much has actually been mobilized by the taxpayers versus the private sector with regards to those projects? Do you have that number? You can always get that back to us later too. But
I'm happy to get that back to you, but I'm happy to take a high-level pass at it. What I can confirm to you is that there is more than $18 billion of private sector money included in that $54.6 billion. And then furthermore, we also look to identify private sector funding of projects around the infrastructure projects that we create. Often the infrastructure that we're financing is the enabling spine for economic development in a region, whether that is the Port of Prince Rupert investment that we've made, which is all about enabling smoother goods flow from the Alberta industrial heartland to global markets. And there we're seeing private sector investment being enabled by that lower cost of trade and smoother trade flows. We had an independent study that identified that there was more than $4 of private sector investment in the wider economy for every dollar.
Okay, I'm going to go slightly differently on a different tangent here, but the bank's supposed to operate. You've talked about having a corporate plan, and the bank's supposed to be operating at an arm's length. Can you outline the safeguards to ensure that what investment decisions you guys are making that's separate from political decisions from the government with regards to where you're lending?
I think my colleague, Mr. Duguay, would be best positioned to answer that question.
So we are an independent Crown corporation established under its own statute and have a board of directors that is appointed by government, but that operates independently from government. And our board is responsible for the oversight of the management and of the business and affairs of the corporation. That includes us making investment proposals and bringing these investment proposals for investment decision by our board. So there's no political interference. We are accountable, as I said earlier, to Parliament through the minister, and that accountability is exercised in several ways. It's exercised through the corporate planning process, as we've talked about earlier in this meeting, in
Okay.
terms of,
Thanks. I'm going to run out of time. I'll pass it over to my colleague
Mr.
here.
Kirk, you've got a good 3 minutes.
Thank you. I'd like to begin my remarks to state that public infrastructure should strengthen Canadian industry, support skilled trades, and keep strategic work here at home. I represent Hamilton, and our steel built this country. We also have shipbuilders in Hamilton as well. Well, my first question is, the Canadian Infrastructure Bank dished out $8.6 million in bonuses from 2024 to 2025. The records show 83% of his executives took a bonus, for an average of almost $200,000 per executive. With 11 projects completed in 9 years, do you think that's warranted? That's good use of taxpayer money?
we and that information is set out in our annual report. We are fully transparent to Canadians with respect to our compensation policies and principles in terms of how we compensate employees, and that includes a base salary and a performance-based incentive plan for all of our employees that is benchmark to our benchmarking group, our reference market, that is generally other crown corporations and corporations in the public and private sector.
Yeah,
and we target the 50th percentile.
Yeah, thank you for explaining it. My question was more along the lines, in 9 years, you guys have completed 11 projects, and I don't know what the measuring stick on success is. I'm not sure if that is or isn't, but we are public accounts, so we have to take the taxpayers' money into an account. So that's why I asked that question. I'll move on to another question. Were you involved in the decision by Canada Infrastructure Bank to subsidize the construction of ferries made in China? Now, we have a big shipbuilder in Hamilton, and I would love to see those jobs go to Hamilton folks. Can you table an analysis your team did on how many Canadian workers throughout our domestic supply chain lost economic opportunity because of this decision? Is that something that you guys could do, or you have that report?
I'll defer to Mr. Robbins, who leads most of our impact work, to try to understand what is sought by the member.
Thank you.
I just want to try to clarify what exactly you're looking for. I think that the important principle here is that the BC Ferries was responsible for the procurement decisions of where they were sourcing their ships from through an internationally competitive process. And so the fact that and BC Ferries has, I believe, attended the Transportation Committee to speak to this. They made the choice of where those ferries were on a basis of a number of different factors. And so the thing that I don't have to be able to prepare that type of analysis is an understanding of.
But your bank funded that? Did your bank fund it?
We provided a loan to BC Ferries to purchase.
So you provided a loan to a company that outsourced Canadian jobs when we have several shipbuilders here in Canada. That's my question, right? So you can dance around it. I don't think you are, but you funded it. Without funding, that wouldn't be possible. There's many jobs that don't get funded, but we have to protect Canadian jobs, especially in this economic downturn, and especially after 11 years of Liberal government. So I would like a report tabled by your bank, exactly the way explained, and I will explain it again. Can you table the analysis your team did on how many Canadian workers throughout our domestic supply chain lost economic opportunity because of this decision? Before you lend money, because I was a broker and lent a lot of money with banks, you have to look at where that money's going. And you have to look at the company you're going to invest in. And I have a very big problem that you guys funded a company that was outsourced and took jobs away from Hamilton and the rest of Canada and put money in the pockets of a communist Beijing government.
Thank you, Mr. Keir. Your time is up. I'm going to allow an answer. I allowed that to go a little longer. I'm aware of that because there was an attempt from the witnesses to try to get to the bottom of what Mr. Keir was asking. So I'm aware of that, and I'll make it up to the government members. Mr. Robbins, would you have an answer for Mr. Keurig?
The thing that I think I would point to is across the $54.6 billion of infrastructure projects that we financed across the country, and that's the total capital cost, it is creating significant economic opportunity in skilled trades, in industry, in the construction industry, across those. We've estimated that there's more than 315,000 construction jobs supported through that. And on these projects, some of the materials and supplies do come from global suppliers. And we always are excited when the project finds ways to increase the supply from Canada, but we also want to ensure that our partners are able to move forward with the project that they need and the requirements that they have.
Thank you. I'm just going to tease this out a little from Mr. Keurig. It sounds like you don't really have the information that he is seeking, which is an impact on the job losses. Is that the information was requested? So I'm duty bound to try to get an answer from you, but I just want to get an answer that kind of best reflects the situation. It sounds like you don't have that. If you do, if you could present it to the committee, that would be appreciated. But I just
we have an analysis of the economic impact of the investment in BC Ferries. We don't have a comparison to another hypothetical.
Okay, is that analysis something that you'd be prepared to table to the committee?
Sorry, I'm just for clarity, we don't have that analysis.
Oh, you don't? Okay, all right then. So there you are, Mr. Keurig. We're now going to move on to Mr. McKinnon. Mr. McKinnon, you've got a good 7 minutes plus. Do you want to take that time? Or are you going to share it with any of your members? If you do, that's totally up to you. But
if I start to flail, I'll pass it on to somebody.
All right then.
Okay.
Over to you.
So I too want to talk about BC Ferries. Certainly, BC Ferries is a provincial crown corporation. It is independent. It certainly doesn't answer to the federal government. But certainly many of us were just disappointed that they were taking their ferry contracts to China. However, I talked to Seaspan, which is a major shipbuilder in our community. They're currently in the throes of building 2 joint supply ships for the Navy, and I think 1 or 2 icebreakers for the Coast Guard. They have no capacity to build it. And I think there were some issues with the RFP. There's timeline issues and so forth, that actually no Canadian firm actually bid on this contract. So I think apart from the potential problems with the RFP process, it didn't take anything away from Canadian firms. However, I'm wondering if the Canadian Infrastructure Bank has any ability to incorporate in its loan mechanism, in its process for approving loans, any kind of process where we can encourage Buy Canadian, where we can encourage projects that are, even if they're executed outside the country, to utilize Canadian products. Is there any mechanism in the Canadian Infrastructure Bank that would support that sort of undertaking?
Mr. Chair, maybe I'll start and turn it over to Mr. Robbins. So as a Crown Corporation, we did receive the directive earlier in January with respect to the Buy Canada procurement policy framework. And so in respect of our own procurement as a Crown Corporation, so goods and services for which we purchase, we are fully aligned with the Buy Canada procurement policy framework. That framework doesn't extend to our investment activities, and as Mr. Robbins, in terms of the trade-offs that need to be made in making an investment and dealing with project partners and proponents in terms of the choices that they need to make and the source of the materials that they require for those projects. We have, though, incorporating some principles in terms of the objectives of the government's Buy Canada policy framework as part of our engagement activities with counterparties and seeking ways to work with them to incorporate these objectives. And maybe Mr. Robbins can expand on that.
I'd just add 2 things. The first is when proponents engage with us about their projects, we start in the materials we share with them. We encourage them to take all available steps that they can have, considering the construct of the project, to find ways to use Canadian suppliers in the course of that project. And then when the project comes for investment decision, we do an economic analysis of the benefits to Canadians, whether that is through economic growth, through a cleaner economy, through other outcomes that matter to Canadians. And so one of the ways that proponents can maximize their score, our return in this way, is around maximizing the benefits to Canadian economy by sourcing locally, by delivering long-term benefits to growth, those sorts of things.
Thank you. So Mr. Couric and Ms. Kusi earlier on indicated concerns about the spending that you do and whether it's bringing good value to Canada. I want to emphasize that really, and I'd like you to speak again on this, that you're not spending money, you're loaning money. And the money you spend, the money you disperse to these projects is going to come back to us with interest, presumably. So, and similarly, Mr. Couric indicated you've completed X number of projects. I don't think it's your job to complete any projects. Your job is to invest properly in proponents who they will be completing the projects, not you. You just got to make sure that the money you loan is going to come back. So would you care to comment on that?
Since 2020, we have consistently committed more than $3 billion a year to new infrastructure projects. And that, results in something north of 8 or 9 in total construction that's occurring across the country. Now, across the country, of our 108 projects, 89 are currently in various stages of construction. What that means is a project that we financed last year should not be completed today. But the projects that we did finance 4 and 5 years ago are the ones that are contributing to that 11 projects that are completed today. So I would point to the 89 projects that are under construction, and we're confident that those over time, over normal construction schedules, are going to convert into completed projects, and they'll enter into repayment and start paying us back. We do a disciplined job of underwriting each and every investment to make sure that it's delivering outcomes for Canadians, and it's within our risk appetite and will be repaid over its life. As we that does require, over time, the projects that get completed, and we look forward to these projects delivering benefits to Canadians, and we're confident that they will.
Thank you. I'm going to switch to your corporate plan. So what are the key differences between your 2024 and 2025 corporate plan and the current 26-27 corporate plan?
The major differences. One is it aligns the investment areas of the CIB to the priority areas of the Government of Canada. The Government of Canada identifies the priority areas that they would like the CIB to invest in, and then the CIB's management, under the oversight of an independent board, sources, develops, and approves investments in those projects. So there was a step to align the CIB's investment activities with the agenda of the Government of Canada that took place in our corporate plan that was approved in December of last year. The second is it reflects the announcement in Budget 2025 of an increase in our appropriations within the 26-27 corporate plan that was approved last week to $45 billion. What that is enabling us to do is to make credible commitments to major projects that will be constructed over the coming decade to provide financing necessary to unlock those projects. Because if you think about today, we're at $18 billion that we've reached financial close on. There's another $10 billion of projects that are currently in various stages of procurement that will reach financial close as they advance closer to construction. Those are the wind projects that I mentioned to your colleague earlier that we're supporting in most provinces across the country.
Okay, I think that's my time.
It is. If any members have another question, I see Mr. Osborne does. Go ahead, Mr. Osborne.
I do have one question, and I just wanted to get an idea. You've completed 9 projects, but you mentioned earlier you have over 100 projects that are in progress that you funded. So there's a couple of things that, for the folks, I guess, that are watching. As Mr. McKinnon pointed out, you loan money, you get that money back. This is not a grant program. But the projects that you have in the works, over 100 projects, any of those that have actually started are creating employment. Can you talk a little bit about the economic impact the employment impact that since you've been incorporated in 2017, what has the impact been to the Canadian economy?
Absolutely. So we have 108 projects, of which 89 have started construction. Of those projects have created economic benefits, GDP benefits of over $40 billion in terms of economic growth that comes from the increase in construction activity, that comes from building infrastructure. We estimate that it supports over 315,000 jobs. This is as of Q3 in December. It then has further downstream economic benefits to Canadians, whether that comes from a lower power rate that comes from more affordable power that enables residents to have a more affordable power bill, or Canadian businesses that use electricity to be more globally competitive. It also has downstream economic benefits in terms of better access to trade. We financed a export terminal at the Port of Prince Rupert in partnership with an Indigenous community, the Metlakatla Development Corporation. That's about breaking down trains that are coming in from Port of Prince Rupert and repositioning them to get them onto ships so that customers in BC or exporters in BC and across the West can have better access to global markets. And that supports jobs all across the country.
Thank you. That's the time. I want to thank our witnesses for coming in today, for your testimony and participation in relation to our study of the public accounts of Canada 2024 and 2025. I'm going to suspend this meeting, and the witnesses are excused, and we'll come back in about 5 minutes in camera. Thank you again. This meeting is suspended.
Thank you.
Thank you.